What's good, YouTubes? Steph here, and welcome to Theta Space. So I just had a birthday, and for my birthday, I got George Hrab's entire discography on Bandcamp. I'm going to be doing an initial ranking of the 7 studio albums based on what I've already heard from them. So George Hrab is a songwriter, composer, and multi-instrumentalist, primarily a drummer. He lives in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and he makes his daily bread playing in a band called the Philadelphia Funk Authority. He's a skeptical, science-minded person, and that comes out in a lot of his songwriting. He's also a big music nerd, a fan of Yes, Rush, Zappa, King Crimson, Talking Heads, and The Police, among many others, and you can hear the influence of those artists in his songwriting as well. He has a weekly podcast called the Geologic Podcast, in which he does skits, recurring segments like Interesting Fauna, The History Chunk, and Geo's Mom Reads Jay-Z Lyrics, and anecdotes from his life as a working musician. So I started listening to George, or Geo, many years back. I think it was an episode of Escape Pod that played his song Think for Yourself at the end. And later I heard Heaven Must Be Boring listening to Mur Lafferty's Heaven audiobook series. It wasn't long after that I started listening to the Geologic Podcast, which had been going on for a little over a year, I think. And so I'd heard a little of his music already by that time, and I heard some more as I listened to his podcast over the next couple of years. He had 5 albums recorded when I started listening, and when he made Trebuchet in 2010, he released it on the podcast in its entirety as an episode. A little earlier than that, he released what was basically a mixtape of songs from his earlier albums. And I also picked up the live video of his 21812 concert from February 18, 2012 at the Ice House in his hometown of Bethlehem. This is the only physical George Hrab media that I actually own. So I've heard quite a few of his songs from every album, except for the most recent one, Terpsichore, which he released last year in 2023. But I haven't heard every album all the way through, so you might be asking,
Steph, how can you rank these albums when you haven't properly listened to them all yet?
That's a fair question, and all I can say is this is a scratch ranking based on my current experience with Geo's music. Later I'm going to rank them again when I've heard them all a few times and see if the ranking changes. But I just thought it'd be interesting to see how I rank them as I am right now. So starting with number 7 at the bottom, Terpsichore from 2023, as I mentioned. And also, as I mentioned, this one's at the bottom only because I have not heard anything from it yet. Number 6, Vitriol, Geo's third album released in 2001. I've heard Monkey Hip Dysplasia and Shoe from this record, plus live versions of Speak to You and Simple Simeon from the 21812 show, and None from an acoustic show that he did in 2007 and released as episode 9 of the Geologic Podcast. There's also B3 Brains Body Both, which is also on the next album, 2004's Coelacanth. But I checked this version and listened to just enough to learn that it's an earlier version than the one I know, which is the one on Coelacanth. Number 5, Minutia, the 1999 predecessor to Vitriol. I know the song Trust Me. It's a great song. It's got clever lyrics. And I also heard For This You Went to College, which is kind of like one of Frank Zappa's meltdown songs. Geo rants about the difficulties of the music business, while the instrumental component is kind of like a free jazz jam sort of thing. There's also The More I Despise It Less, which I've heard live versions of, but not the album version. Number 4, Interrobang. I've heard a number of songs from this album. It's his 5th album, which was released in 2006. Blue Jeans, The Assumption, Disappointed, Out of My Mind, and Who Dogs the Outlet are the album tracks that I've heard from this record. Most of those were in the mixtape that he released as a podcast episode as kind of an overview of his past catalog pre-Trebuchet. I've also heard live versions of Barney's in the Vent, which is his Mission Impossible song. Heard Ya Famous, and She Suffers from Superlatives, and Sciurus carolinensis, which is a song about squirrels. Look out for the squirrels, they can be driving you nuts. So yeah, rank this one a little higher because I know more songs from it, and they're good songs. Number 3 is his 1996 debut album, Sick. I have only heard 3 songs from this. They're all songs that I heard on his mixtape podcast episode. Age of the Fern and Incompetent, and Roman, which is another meltdown sort of song. Even though I've only heard those 3 songs from this album, Age of the Fern and Incompetent are just really great tracks. You really hear that Zappa influence in there. I think also on Age of the Fern you can really hear his Police influence, some very Stuart Copeland-like drumming in there. Roman I don't care for quite as much, but Age of the Fern and Incompetent are so good that this album ranks all the way up at number 3 for me right now. Number 2 is Trebuchet, the only album that I've actually heard all the way through, that I've listened to more than once as an album, not just song by song. It's his 6th album, released in 2010 and released to the podcast feed, which is how I heard it. This is God is Not Great. There's his skepticism and atheism influencing the songwriting there. Everything Alive Will Die Someday. Far, which he wrote for the 365 Days of Astronomy podcast for a theme song. Svatoslav Lobster, really good Steely Dan sort of vibe to that one. When I Was Your Age, which he actually wrote for Beatnik Turtle. They recorded it. This is his own version. But I think the Beatnik Turtle version still has him on vocal, but they played the instrumental part. This is Gio's version, though. It's a song he wrote for one of his young cousins about what life was like, what the world was like when he was that cousin's age. And Gio is actually a contemporary of mine. I believe he's only a year or 2 younger than me. So I can totally relate to that song. There's some great instrumentals on Trebuchet, the title track Trebuchet, and Hayuki Toya, and One Hypnopompic Jerk. There's the song Small Comfort, which is his own materialistic perspective on putting down his dog Oscar. And Happy Birthday Baby, which is his go at writing an old 40s type song like Frank Sinatra or Mel Torme might sing. It's quite good, actually, and the way he wrote it, it can really be a happy birthday song for anyone, for your child, for your beloved. It's a good song, yeah, and good album, so it's at number 2. And at the top of the list is Coelacanth, 2004's Coelacanth, his 4th album. This one goes in the number 1 slot, mostly on the strength of the epic title track or instrumental, the Coelacanth Sighs. It's kind of the title track. This one also has Think for Yourself, the Freethinkers anthem. Heaven Must Be Boring. Convenient, which is his take on the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer story. How Do You Do, his expression of admiration for his friend Slough. And this has the version of Brains, Body, Both that I'd heard, basically his description of his perfect woman. I've also heard from this album, I've heard live versions of Lights Out, Simple Simeon, which is also on Vitriol. There's a Simple Simeon on the track list for Vitriol, but I haven't heard either album version. I've only heard the live 21812 performance, so I'm not sure. I haven't gone in like the Brains, Body, Both one to see what's different. But unlike Brains, Body, Both, I've only heard live versions of this, so I never heard either album version. Anyway, number 1, Coelacanth. And that's how my ranking stands at this point, when I've just bought all the albums but haven't listened to them yet. I'll revisit this topic again when I'm ready to do a proper ranking. In the meantime, anyone else listen to Geo? Any geologists or geographers out there, or even just listen to the Geologic Podcast? You have a favorite song or album? Let me know in the comments, and also smash like if you up, and hit subscribe. It doesn't cost anything. See you next time. Bright Moments, Steph out.